Before we begin, let's look at the honorable mentions. Again, movies that I want to talk about that didn't make either list. Okay, this wasn't from GameStop, but I'm changing it up to just be any of my non-black tees I can wear during the honorable mentions. I wasn't able to quite make the theme work. I found this Wario shirt over there once, and I bought that, but I'm like, you wouldn't be able to see Wario's like down here on the flank, and I'm like, what the heck's up with this shirt? So they're just changing it to be any non-black shirt that I own. So Nicolas Cage didn't make it onto the honorable mentions this year with a movie that works for the first 2/3 and then collapses partway through. But this is the movie that sort of most closely resembles that, as far as I think being pretty good for the first 2/3, and then almost similar to Keanu, when once the sort of central conceit of it sort of goes away and they sort of have to move out of the area where everything is set in, the movie kind of collapses. Though I think it's still quite tense and interesting for the most part, even as it leaves. And let's be real, maybe casting his daughter wasn't the best move, but actually she's a really good singer. In the credits for the movie Old, the last one he did before this, Sellecker sung a song during the credits. And based on what I used to do, I had to hear that song about 100 times. And actually, I never really got sick of it. I actually like it. I think she's terrific. I do think she is a much better singer than she is an actress. You can tell she's trying. I don't necessarily think it works that good. Then again, M. Night has always sort of occasionally gotten odd performances from people that you know are good. So that could just be a result of that as well. And maybe, because of their relationship, maybe he doesn't want to, be as hard on her as he might normally be with an actor. I don't know if he's that kind of a director. And honestly, in the era of post-Kubrickian stuff, it's like, where we don't accept the fact that sometimes directors just bully the absolute hell out of actors and actresses, usually actresses for some weird reason, that we don't accept that anymore. It's one of these things where it's like, you don't have to do that. And it's like, you're a director. Just find the words, make them do it the right way. You have to earnestly just upset them to make them cry on camera. They're actors. They're supposed to be able to do this. And if you can't do that, that's the director's fault, unless they're just really, really bad. Which could be the case here. I'm not sure. I don't think this works all the way through. But I think we should just let M. Night do essentially whatever he wants, because it is almost always interesting. So Jean Reno plays a Brazilian man who befriends a penguin. And that's pretty much it. This is evidently based on a true story, and for the most part when I'm watching it, I sort of didn't care. It's very lightweight, but it's also entirely guileless in the sense of it's not trying to trick you for this. It's just trying to tell a sweet little story about a penguin and a dude. And they get separated at one point, and the penguin escapes in a way that, we don't know his story. We don't know the penguin side of the story, so this is obviously entirely invention by the filmmakers. But then after they have the reunion, we have the big happy moment at the end, and then text pops up on the screen that says that after 8 or 9 years, the penguin stopped visiting him, and they never saw each other again, possibly because he found a mate in his world on the other thing and stopped his long migration back up to Brazil. And that was the one this year. Usually there's about one movie that gets me, and that was it, but it's just because they were like, hey, it's like, hey, they were happy, text, they weren't happy. What the f***? I am baffled by the praise that this movie got. Yes, it looks amazing, but whenever a movie has to praise at the start of itself that it was shot on film, I kind of get suspicious. Hey, they were Whopper Juniors, alright? It is nice looking, but it isn't quite on the level of Crimson Peak or Skyfall, where they look amazing. Crimson Peak might be the best looking movie I saw in the theater. Every frame of that movie could be a still image. It just looked astonishing. Wasn't for the fact that it looks pretty good. They do certain filmic tricks that they talk about with pulling focus on two things in a certain way. But if it wasn't for that, probably the only thing I would have noticed was the obnoxious bread tube lighting that was on everything, where everything was just super colorful. And I'm like, yeah, it looks all right, but it does look awful showy. If they hadn't made such a big deal out of it at the start, I probably wouldn't have even noticed that it was that way, except for all the colorful lighting. I'd be like, is this season 12 of friggin' Doctor Who? Are they on Lex? What's going on here? And look, that poor guy from Breaking Bad who's in this movie, he is going to get typecast as hell if he does this same thing one more time. If he didn't Breaking Bad, I probably just spoiled part of this movie, but it also was kind of like, well, this is just what happens. But it might have even just been a deliberate Easter egg in this thing for whatever. As much as I didn't find that much to enjoy in this movie, it ain't making the worst list for a reason that will become dreadfully apparent. Evidently, Giovanni Ribisi was the director of photography on this movie. And, you know, good for him. And also, he appears to have a great skill at it. So, he's interested in trying challenging shots. Like, the whole movie starts in this running shot of a woman in the distant background and keeping her in focus as she runs up this enormous field. It's very long. They like lots of long shots, which gets kind of, you know, wanky, as some people might say. But nevertheless, it is well executed. So I hope he does go far, and maybe he'll slip into the... You always hear about actors moving to the director's chairs, they want to be in charge, but you never hear them moving to like a technical field like this. So, you know, good for him. And like, I don't have any anger towards this movie. I just was like, I don't get what you guys all see in this. But I also never understood why people found Angelina Jolie attractive until Maleficent came out. So then, like, it sort of just somehow unlocked when she's like this sort of spooky woman with the high cheekbones and the weird dress and the evil attitude. And I'm like, why did this do this? Why did this unlock something in me? I don't know. Should I cut this? I'm going to do one of them gags where I'm like, hey, cut this part out. Am I doing that again? I did it like 2 years in a row with Jennifer Frooms and that girl from Jackass 4. Am I doing it again? Probably not. What the hell's wrong with me? Evidently a passion project from Berkeley Breathed. It's interesting to have a kids movie that is so weirdly offbeat. I'm not going to go out there and say it's great, but it is interesting to have an outside perspective on the sort of kids movie thing here. And I don't normally call out actors on this one, but I think someone needed to sort of rein in Lily Singh as the elephant because she's just so gosh darn eager in this. And I'm like, and that's sort of for her character, but it's to a point where like no one else is kind of matching the energy, or it does kind of feel like people are talking past each other. Now, evidently the hit pig was recast as someone else. I'm not going to say who it was because this has apparently happened before. And, you know, cartoons will usually pop things up like this, like when some kind of creative dispute took Al Pacino out of Despicable Me 2, like a couple months before it came out. So Benjamin Bratt came in and saved the day. Benjamin Bratt is so good. I like him a lot. But she's just so gosh darn chipper that she makes Kelly Clarkson's performance in Ugly Dolls look like Ben Stein. I'm not sure that kind of performance matches this sort of deliberately very odd kids movie story. And why is he called the hit pig if he doesn't kill anybody? He just, like, he captures people. I mean, they could do a bunch of, like, Taken jokes or whatever, but there's making the guy who takes people, who's kidnapping people, the good guys in that one. So it's very weird. So here's a movie that doesn't really do anything wrong, but really isn't really that good either. This is We Have John Wick at Home. The problem is that this movie is it's trying to be a little more character-based than the John Wick movies, which, I mean, there are characters, but it's more situation-based and action set-piece-based. And there are some of those in this movie, but they're not really up to snuff. They're trying to give scenes to the assassins that are following this guy to give them a little characterization, but I think that sort of works against it, and we sort of take away from this, except for people like Terry Crews who are working for them. So, like, you know, one of our main antagonists and Batista and Sofia Boutella are all doing good work, but it isn't lifting the project any. Someday there'll be a project that uses Sofia Boutella properly, and that movie will be terrific. But this I don't even think is as good as Atomic Blonde, which I don't think was even that great anyway. Stay with me on this one. This is a documentary, but it's an animated documentary about the rise of Pharrell, made by him himself, telling his story about his rise to the music scene. And everyone is a Lego figure. He uses a visual metaphor for the beats he creates as little sort of Lego pieces of unusual shapes and sizes and colors that sort of pulse to represent beats and music that he creates, which I think is a very interesting visual metaphor. The movie's rated PG despite a little bit of dirty language in there that you would not expect from an animated PG movie. At one point, they talk to Snoop Dogg, and they have these guys with little foggers that they move out that says PG smoke that fill the room with smoke, because obviously you cannot have a reference to marijuana in a PG movie, because wasn't that what happened to, what was that movie, Beasts of the Southern Wild, where they rated PG-13 because at one point you saw a crack pipe or something, or a weed pipe, and you just can't do that. Otherwise, the movie is has nothing appropriate at all. You know how we are with drugs in this country. Like, this is clearly a passion project, and usually I rank those pretty harshly, but I at least see the passion on this as far as it's so unusual that I'm sure the fact that this, I don't think this did any good, but I don't think Farrah gave a crap, because I think he made it to make it and to tell his story in this way. I don't think anybody who is interested in music should probably give this a shot. I don't know anything about music. But really, when's the last time you saw an animated movie that was based on a true story? Balto, Pocahontas, Anastasia, which we've talked about is not based on a true story. It was based on a true lie, I guess you want to say that. Hey, true lies. Red One's not so bad, guys. Shut up. It's not worth making a fuss about. I don't know why everyone turned on The Rock so fast this year. Red One is just mostly unsuccessful and perhaps just a little overproduced. And furthermore, Chris Evans' part was clearly meant to be Ryan Reynolds. Because he plays this sort of cad who at one point literally steals a literal candy from a literal baby to be like, hey, he's kind of a jerk. He doesn't really sort of give any more of an impression of that like this. And it's one of these things was like, come on, guys. Like, I mean, he's more of a rakish character than Chris Evans is, and Chris Evans is playing this kind of guy. It doesn't really work. People are ripping on this movie like it's some sort of like really noteworthy catastrophe. But we had so many of them this year that I'm kind of like, hey, you guys have any perspective? They talk about like the enormously inflated budget and how it didn't make that much money at the box office. But evidently this was probably just going to go directly to Amazon anyway. But I think when you have The Rock, it's like, give it a chance to give it in theater so people can see it in the theater like I did. So it is one of the things that's like, if it is just this Amazon movie that's a holiday thing that can just go on to Amazon Prime, people just watch it. If they already have Amazon Prime or possibly get them to sign up for it for this entire like month where people watch anything with some red and green in it, like, I think that like their money was already, you know, bought and sold beforehand. It was kind of like when there was that one movie that's going to come out to theaters and went to Amazon, but they just paid the entire production budget to put it on Amazon. It's like, well, screw you, theaters. And it's like, yeah, like that sucks for theaters, but it's probably good for production crews to be like, hey, we'll make whatever. Like lots of just weird, oddball stuff is just appearing on these streaming sites that wouldn't likely make a dent in actual box office stuff because they're just too sort of out there. We'll talk about that a little higher up on the list as far as things like that sort of climbing out of Netflix or whatever. Like when Netflix released like The Gray Man to like actual movie theaters, that was fine. It wasn't like super great, but at least it had the shape of a real movie. Sometimes they just release things that are just very different and not ready for prime time. All these people on there who talk about why things failed or whatever, and a lot of them might have probably been harsher on, like, say, like the Marvels not doing good as they did for, like, when Joker 2 kind of bombed off the face of the earth. Maybe they had different opinions of that. Though, like, the Vulture just attacked Joker 2 when that whole thing fell apart. But nevertheless, maybe it'd be easier to just watch movies and have opinions rather than just talk about box office scores as if it was a sports game or something. Maybe that's where the attitude comes from, is the notion of numbers just being completely like the number's higher so I'm right. I don't know. Some of those guys are extremely tiresome. At the end of the day, we all know that like financial success is not the sole bellwether for whether something is good or not. So why don't we stop using Box Office Mojo as a replacement for having an opinion? Jason Statham tries to put on his big boy John Wick pants, and weirdly the results are less elegantly executed than I think even the Killer's Game from earlier. So, spoilers for the start of this movie. The titular beekeeper keeps bees on this person's property, and then this person gets targeted by one of these hackers who talks about an advanced fee scam, essentially. If you know what this is, one time they say, we need to get access to your computer, and they manage to psychologically manipulate her into giving up her bank information, and they suck out all the money from her account and from a charity that she runs. And this shame and destitution leads her to kill herself. And this sets our titular beekeeper on the path to revenge. And we find this whole other thing where not only is he a beekeeper, but there's a whole other thing where he was a beekeeper, which is the secret society of beekeepers who are also keeping the hive that is America alive and whatever. But that's not even what I want to talk about, because that's pretty standard stuff. If you know anybody who's old, you probably know someone who might have fallen at least one step from one of those advanced fee scams. I know someone, she's no longer with us. She's a somewhat older woman I used to work with for like 20 years, who they were like, hey, we need to send you this gift card. And she did it. I think it was to the tune of like $500. Then after that, she realized, oh, crap, and then gave it up. Like she got fooled once, but she was not stupid, and she wasn't a fool, really. She just got tricked that one time. There are people who get cemented into it and then continue to think of the sunk cost fallacy and throw thousands at these things until just being unable to admit that they were wrong or tricked is too much to bear, which is probably one of the reasons why in this it is entirely realistic that this other character in here took her own life, because of the shame. Some people can't bear being fooled and having your life savings wiped out like that. The Beekeeper could be the worst movie ever made. And if it saved just one person from losing their money to one of these criminals, then it's worth it. Okay, we're going long on this one. Somehow, Wicked is not the most theatrical movie that we had this year. This really has the feeling of something that could have been a stage play that was then turned directly into a movie. The cast is, for the most part, very good at playing the younger versions of the not ready for primetime players, including J.K. Simmons as Milton Berle, who is fantastic. But I mean, you knew that once you heard that, I'm sure. I'm not certain about his place in the story, as far as I think he's meant to be part of the old tradition in Hollywood of what entertainment was, with its connection to vaudeville and other things. And that SNL was the counterculture thing trying to push against him, I guess. That's what his place in the story is. I'm not certain this is even really real. I know there was some connection to him with SNL, but they have him as sort of like a minor villain in the couple of scenes he's in. Not sure that's real, but for something like this, that's obviously sort of very theatrical and fictionalized. This is obviously not meant to be documentary. It's so, as I said, theatrical. And at the center of this is a 21-year-old actor playing Lorne Michaels. Oh, he's not doing a Lorne Michaels impression or anything like that, you might expect, but I mean, that might just make the movie incredibly corny, and maybe he didn't sound like that back in the day. Like, this is a fantastic and absolutely, utterly anchoring performance for this entire picture. If they messed up him, the whole picture wouldn't have worked. He's an expert at trying to control this chaos and just somehow barely keep his head above water. I'm a little uncertain about the guy who played John Belushi, but I mean, maybe it's accurate. I'm not as familiar with John Belushi's work. He's been gone a lot longer than I was around. It's got to be better than Wired, at least. Good Lord. Oh, and this is funny. Because of a quirk in the casting, there's a guy playing Jim Henson. He's got this great big beard, but then later on, the same guy plays Andy Kaufman without his beard. And things like that, like someone playing two roles and sort of thing. You might even do that in a play. You have him with a fake beard, maybe, in the start. But you have him playing Kaufman later, like almost like Angels in America or something like that, where you have people playing multiple roles. But this is my favorite movie where a man played two roles, one with a beard and one without a beard, since Clerks. Sadly, as good as the cast is, I don't think this movie works as either drama or comedy, really. It either should have been a lot funnier, or it should have been more informative about why Saturday Night Live was such a change in the cultural zeitgeist, the way that Straight Outta Compton told us why they were important. At one point, two people pitched the Cordon Blood sketch, the famous one where they chop off What's-Her-Face's finger. And look, I always hated that because I don't like blood or whatever, but I also get like the radicalness of that sketch, and it's obviously one of the most famous ones. It was on that list of like 100 favorite moments on TV, and TV Guide did like in the 90s or something. But there's also a certain point where I find this sort of reference sort of tedious, as far as like, you expect this guy to come up, it's like, what's your name? It's like, my name's Steve Martin. No, I wanted to play a wild and crazy guy. And it's like, no, we need duos. And he's like, all right, let's go find some other guy to do this with. What's your name? My name's Dan. It's like, hey, what's that book? Oh, it's a book on Egyptology. Shut up! And then a friend of mine compared it to a different show that was created in the mid-70s, where it's one character attempting to control all the chaos and try to get the show going, despite all the naysayers in the balcony. So yeah, Saturday Night is not nearly as funny or as interesting as any equal portion of The Muppet Show. And now, on to the best list. Okay, laugh it up. You know, you think it'd be hard to make something compelling about two characters who can essentially never die? There's a part in the opening where it has Wade talking to Happy Hogan and talking about how he wants to get in. It's clearly just meant to be, you know, them talking to the real, like, progenitor of this entire thing, Jon Favreau himself. There's a meme recently that's talking about Iron Man 2 and how it's like, oh yeah, Scarlett Johansson, please choke me out with your thighs. That's very important for the scene. But also in the sense of, you remember like how he played Happy Hogan in the very first one, and in the comics I'm pretty sure Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts wind up together. I don't think Tony and her wound up together in the comics, although there's lots more comic continuity, but that wasn't as big a thing. So you kind of wonder if he's like, oh, you know, I get to give a kissy to Gwyneth Paltrow, and then it's like, this happens, it's like, ah, darn. So, like, I do like this movie, but I kind of wish the year was better in the sense of something like this wouldn't necessarily make a best list. Usually Marvel stuff doesn't, in the sense of like, okay, I like it, but whatever. Although this one is a lot better than I sort of expected for the sort of obligation, this sort of had the feeling of. This year also brought us, the future development that Doctor Doom would be played by Robert Downey Jr., and this is a development that makes me very hesitant. This sort of reminds me of how when they revealed the 14th Doctor, it was just David Tennant again. And, it's not necessarily that I don't think David Tennant was fine coming back to the role as an older man. Not he's older, but he was a lot younger when he did the role, 17 years prior or something. But it doesn't seem that it's like, oh, this would be an interesting way to do this. It really does seem like after the 13th Doctor's rocky tenure, they're like, what can we do to course correct and make certain we got a hit on our hands? Let's bring back most people's favorite modern version of the Doctor. There's plenty of times in these movies you see the strings being pulled. Oh, you got to do this, got to do that. And sometimes it's a little more elegant than that. With things like that, with the 14th Doctor, I'm kind of like, really? I mean, okay, let's do it. But it does feel like, hey, let's please give the fans what they want. Especially with, Russell Davies coming back and other things. All right, yeah, let's attempt to correct the ship and give the fans what they want. There was a metaphor I meant to use in the 2023 review, but I just forgot to talk about it. Did you guys ever watch Sorted Food? They're a YouTube cooking channel from England where they like to talk about minimizing food waste, because obviously that can be a big problem. So there's one point where someone just made a meal and then had the scraps left, and then a chef had to take the scraps and turn it into something that was actually edible. For the most part, I don't think they're eating eggshells, but so that was the whole thing where it's okay, let's use what we have left over. To me, that's the metaphor for The Flash, where it's okay, we have this project that is completely, out of control. We got to do something with it, and we have to do this sort of course correction with the Flashpoint stuff. Let's just try to do it. And that was the metaphor I had for this. So that's how I feel about them, finally folding the Fox X universe into this one. However they do it. It really is sort of okay, well, we got this now. How do we use this in a way that is interesting and fun? And there's a sort of metaphor about certain characters we may never see again, and the world where they're going to exist. And they can always be pulled back in or out. There isn't a lot of death in that world. It is just well, hang on, if we want something, we just sort of ploop and pull it in out of here. In the same way that what's the time agency from Loki? I haven't seen Loki. That whole thing is just it's just okay, if we want to correct some continuity or go into a different universe, we can just do it now because these guys have that kind of multiversal power. It's okay, sure, cool. And in the sense of Robert Downey Jr. becoming Doctor Doom, I am it's okay, it could work, but I feel like the tail is wagging the dog a little bit here for some of this. So after with Deadpool Wolverine, it's okay, how do we do this? Let's see if we can bring back one of our older players. We'll see how much longer he can do it as far as just the physical stuff. But it's okay, let's he thought he was done with it, but let's bring it on back. We're all about revivals now, I guess. It's a bit brave to do this when people are really getting tired of multiverses and meta humor. But what would be better for, using Deadpool for, right? For just something very silly and meta. And yeah, this is still a very fun action movie with actually a couple of strong character moments from these two characters you don't think would ever learn anything. And no other movie this year made me cry out, no way, twice in 10 seconds. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. I am extremely on the fence on this one. I think I can summon a defense for this. I looked back at the 2023 list and I saw that the D&D movie was at the 8th spot, and I was kind of really? There's still a lot of that movie I don't like. But there's also a lot of movie that I do like, and obviously it was kind of a weak year that year too. So I think I can stick up for this. I can do the same thing for this one. I actually hesitated filming this stuff. We're filming this on the... what day is it? We're filming this on the 14th of January, which is a little later than I wanted to. But I wanted to see Sonic 3 and Better Man to see if either of them would really blow me away, to see if they would make a spot on this list instead. Neither of them are bad, don't get me wrong, but nevertheless, neither of them impressed me that much, so we're sticking with this. At this moment, it's now the weekend after Better Man premiered with really nothing, and I'm bro, nobody in America knows who Robbie Williams is. I remember seeing a long time ago there was top 10 worst music videos ever. And I remember seeing it was this one guy where he was doing a striptease until he's naked, and then he takes off his skin. And I was oh my god. And everyone was oh, this is horrifying. That's apparently Robbie Williams, because one of the apes who stands in for him is him without skin. And I'm this sort of stuff doesn't make sense. Unless you know who this is, and you know that these other personas are all representations of aspects of him. And let's just be real, like, watching a movie about a musician being a jerk and a drug addict for a long time, like, I'm glad he's getting out these feelings, but the fact is, like, okay, like, we've seen this now a bunch of times. We know that this is how musicians have to live, and we're glad you made it through it, and we're glad you still have your money, but, I mean, this whole thing, I don't get why this, like, got made. I hope it does well in its native country. That would be cool, but over here, I'm just like, okay, I just don't know who you are. I'm trying to think of like an American celebrity that didn't really reach over the pond and who this would be about. Who would that be? Like the ICP. What are we going to try to... Here's the ICP movie, and all the English people would be like, ew. A man with a severe facial disfigurement undergoes a experimental procedure that not only gives him a new face, that face is handsome. Lucky him. But losing his face means he has to leave behind his old life, including one woman who showed him kindness despite his disfigurement. Alright, so, you know, a lot of these movies like this, like I've talked about the guys who are undateable and whatever, and not that somebody who has this sort of thing would be, but I think the way they characterize the woman with this is just a little too cute and easy, although maybe it's meant to be that she simply found his disfigurement fascinating or something. Not really sure. It's not like a terrible thing, but there is like a sex scene halfway through this movie that is so awkward, and I'm like, alright. But at the midpoint of this movie, we are introduced to Adam Pearson, who plays Oswald, a real man with a real disfigurement that is the same as the fictional character one. And that's where this movie opens up completely. So Adam Pearson appeared on a worst list once before. He was in Under the Skin, and he's actually the best part of that movie too, because it's a movie with him and Scarlett Johansson talking about this, and he talks about what his disfigurement has led for his life. And evidently this is where he got the love of acting, and like this whole project is sort of around this whole thing as far as doing this. Here, Adam absolutely gets to steal the show as this remarkably funny and charming man, despite his disability. And it really is something to see our protagonist sort of look at what his life could have been if he stayed where he was and simply embraced life. Sadly, like a lot of high-concept movies like this, it doesn't quite stick the landing. It's not like the whole third act is bad like some of these other movies I talk about. More like the last, like, 10 minutes sort of going away, and it's sort of like, and then this, and then it's like, what? Whoa, slow down. So this movie has a similarity to something that's way high on the worst list, as far as something that happens within the last, like, little bit of the movie that you're really surprised about. It's like, whoa, what the heck? Although in this movie, it is really surprising. It comes out of nowhere. And you kind of wonder if just the filmmakers just didn't quite know how to have a climax for this whole thing. You know, and I guess I sort of get it, thinking back on it. By the time I was like, what are we doing here, movie? What the heck? And yeah, as far as movies where someone goes through a experimental procedure and comes back as a more beautiful version of themselves, I chickened out and I didn't see the substance. That one's meant to be either crazy or just, you know, unbearable, depending on what you think. So maybe that would have taken this place, maybe it wouldn't have. I'm not really sure, but I chickened out in this one, and this one I did see. And this one I do appreciate. I still think Under the Skin is terrible, but I think it's might honestly be worth giving it a shot for that thing in the middle. I don't think I thought so back 10 years ago. Nowadays, I might just be like, yeah, what the heck? If something has, like, a scene that's that good in it, it would save it. But maybe that movie that's on the worst list also has one good scene in it, and that's not worth watching at all, so. Forget what I said earlier. This is the Nicolas Cage movie that gets to about the third act and then falls apart. Okay, maybe falls apart is too strong of a word, but the third act is a little bit unsatisfying. Say what you will about Nicolas Cage, he is at least interested in attempting to give different kinds of performances and different kinds of genres. We have drama, horror, sci-fi, experimental, bad, 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 really, really, really good, life-changing. Michael Monroe plays a surprisingly talented and possibly clairvoyant FBI agent who is attempting to find the reason for a series of murders, all attributed to the titular Longlegs. The movie is quite cold and sterilely shot, but with unusual elements creeping in and scratching at the periphery. Could this be something terrifying, or could this just be our hero's perception of worlds that other people cannot see? If she is even as special as we seem to think that she is. This is a very beautifully shot movie that thankfully didn't see the need to brag about it so much. It helps that Michael Monroe is absolutely fantastic in this, embodying the word statuesque as she endures all these weird things in this world around her, in a world that would test almost anyone. When I talked about Watcher 2 years ago, I forgot that she was also in It Follows, another rare, like, horror movie that I liked. So maybe it's just her being in it, that's doing this. I don't know. I don't need another celebrity crush, so. But I swear, this one is really quite good. "2024 wasn't that great for movies, was it?" Look, Inside Out 2 is merely decent. I might have had more fun with Moana 2, although that's not particularly special. I like the songs, but people said, oh, that's not what's-his-face writing them, and I'm like, I couldn't tell, but that's because I don't know anything about music. Some people really didn't like the songs. I don't know. I thought even Kung Fu Panda 2 was, acceptable. I remember leaving when I heard they were going to do a cover of Baby One More Time. I'm like, oh god, don't do that, Tenacious D. And then I listened to it, I'm like, no, this song rules. This is really good. Inside Out 2 just has too many characters at this point. Now, with there being 5 brand new emotions, and a couple of them barely get to do anything at all, maybe it wouldn't work, it wouldn't be enough of a story if there was only 2 or 3 new ones. So making Riley an emotional teenager is just tedious. And it's one of the only times where the outside stuff doesn't necessarily make sense completely by itself, but without contextualizing this one with what's going inside the head, that scene doesn't really make sense. It's the only time in either movie that this happens. And yeah, 2 of our 5 original emotions got recast, because apparently Disney heavily lowballed them. But it's one of them things where it's like, there's going to be a surefire hit. So it's like, I'm not saying back up the dump truck, but I'm also like, hey, keep your cast sweet. But also on the other hand, maybe the actors want to keep Disney sweet to be like, hey, cast in DuckTales 5 or whatever, some other thing that they're doing, because they seem to like to stay in-house with people that they can rely on. But there's one new emotion that is handled essentially perfectly. It's not one that you can ever truly be rid of, just like sadness. But it's one of them things where you hope that they won't have control all the time. They'll still be around, and they'll still have their baggage sitting around, so to speak, but you can at least not let them have too much control. Maybe now at year's end, I might think a little more dimly on this movie about a Byzantine election process, which nobody seems to be happy with the results of, because everyone was working about strategy and scandal. But nevertheless, especially when the machinations of the church are a big reason for why this demagogue has gotten to power, So for all I really care, there could just be no pope. But this is a lovely story about men, and let's be fair, it is always men, and their belief systems and how they are trying to reconcile their beliefs and their connection with the supernatural world with the scripture that is there in front of them. But how can they make the right decision? Some try to reconcile this by communicating directly with God through prayer. But he's not answering, just like always. What was a little refreshing to see in this, what is essentially a political thriller, was even the firebrand anti-gay preacher allegedly was anti-gay because of its inclusion in scripture. He wasn't just anti-gay because there's political hay to be made out of it and minorities to push down. So it was actually just a little refreshing. And I might want to see some actual conviction from our American bigots if we must continue to have them. I mean, when I was like 12 and 13 and I realized that there actually was like anti-gay stuff in the Bible, it wasn't one of these things like, oh, well, gay people must be bad. That was when I was like, oh, the Bible has stuff that's wrong in it. I think there's a real clear definition of character that appears there. But whatever. So remember, kids, go out and vote for Pope, I guess. One might think after the conclusion of the last movie that this movie would have absolutely nowhere to go. But we do have a new story about the society that's formed, hence those movies. But it's not necessarily the utopia that was from the 60s versions just yet. Ape has definitely killed Ape this time. And our hero has to find an artifact from the previous world to see if he can use it to attempt to change the fate of their new world. I mean, we know this isn't going to all go back to normal and be like, oh, we're back, and all of a sudden it's a romantic comedy set in a magazine. It's like, hi there, how you doing? Want a banana? That's racist, Karen. Sadly not. The world is still just a terrible and brutal place for man and for ape. With the original, there's like 4 sequels. Were any of them on the caliber of these movies? I don't know how they keep pulling it off. Holy cow, this turned into such a boring list. Another fine entry into a series that I've liked every part of, but now I think we can slow down. We can either get part 3 and put a capstone on all this, or unless they really think of a city that would be very interesting to see the outset of this invasion from. Otherwise, I think I'm okay with this now. Lupita Nyong'o plays a terminally ill woman who has nevertheless managed to survive the outset of this alien invasion. Through that same perseverance that allowed her to survive this long through her illness, our heroine has to encounter that one sort of obstacle that the family in the first two movies never really had to encounter. A person worth saving. One might think if that you were already terminally ill and something like this happened, you could just roll over and die. But that's not really how human psychology works, especially when faced with something so grand as the literal end of the world. Her clock is already ticking, and maybe the things that she can do could just save just one life that becomes ever more precious as the human population is cut down like dandelions. If everything's going to be a franchise these days, it might as well be good. You know, it doesn't have to be a classic, but it can at least be effective and diverting. After all, we all only get one life. Lupita Nyong'o gets the Ben Affleck Award, where she gets to be on the list twice this year. Woohoo! High five! I'm not the least bit surprised that the creator of Lilo and Stitch had another good one in the tank, and I don't think it's that live-action one they're coming out with next year. Of all the things that benefit from, a non-realistic and animated stylization, I think Stitch is one of them. I have a friend who loves Stitch stuff. I mean, I wasn't always huge in him, but I think him being a little cartoon is always kind of fun. I think a live action, I don't think that's going to work, but, like, whatever. I'll see it, I'm sure. Or maybe I won't. I didn't see Mufasa. The movie's about a robot that gets lost in shipping, lands on this island filled with creatures, and becomes one tiny defenseless creature's unlikely protector. And Pedro Pascal is a revelation in voice work as this rather unscrupulous fox, who is almost a co-parent in a certain way. Yeah, the movie's a metaphor about parenting, and usually I dislike stuff like this. But what I do kind of like is that the metaphor in the notion of that it's if you don't think you're meant to be a parent, and if you have a certain slightly robotic way of looking at the world or something very logical, but then a lot of those things don't necessarily translate to being a parent. So I could definitely see this being a beautiful metaphor for being a neuroatypical parent. Or even for someone like me who really has no intention of ever having kids, you could see it in the sense of a metaphor for saying that you were not necessarily built to do a certain task, but that if the task is there and it must be done, you must find some way to do it, you know? This is a beautifully executed movie that I still don't have that much really to say about it, but is the one on this list that I recommend the most unreservedly, in the sense of, like, I think any general audience or any kids out there should give this one a watch. Where the hell did this come from? A preview of the war on Cybertron before the two sides of Autobots and Decepticons ever even really formed. We see two unassuming friends who are just trying to make their lives work. But these two pals stumble upon a wild conspiracy that shows that almost every single person on Cybertron has had something taken from them, their literal birthright. Alright, this part of the movie doesn't necessarily work because, you know, they literally take the gearbox out of them. That means that they're not able to transform at certain points, so they're stuck as they are. I'm kind of like, are they all called Transformers on this thing? Do they know this has been taken out? I guess what it is, you can't really have like an underclass of people if you can literally change shape and be whatever you want to be. So, but I don't necessarily know if this works as far as a continuity thing with this, but it's obviously meant to be there to tell a story. It's the same thing with like the labor in Ready Player One. Move these things over here. It's like, why is this necessary in a world of virtual reality? But like whatever, these are minor quibbles on this one, and obviously a way to get the story moving. I think Transformers 1 was betrayed by its simplistic marketing, which mostly focuses on like the first parts of the movie before it moves into this surprisingly raw and intense core of high emotions, and this movie just never slows down at that point. The same way we sort of lost some of the spooky, creepy stuff that we used to give kids with like Goosebumps or whatever, I think we've lost the ability to show kids how to interpret high emotions and things like this. This is a movie about the development of anger and resentment about the world that is not just, let's be fair. I might be forgetting something, but I think that Transformers 1 is the best animated kids movie based on a license, at least since the Lego movie. It's not quite as good as that, but this is how surprisingly good this is. It might be controversial putting this above The Wild Robot, and The Wild Robot could legitimately become a classic. But nevertheless, as far as the one that surprised me the most this year, it was absolutely Transformers 1. I had someone in one of my Discords, like, it was like, it said something to the order of, yo, Transformers 1 is legit. And I'm like, really? And I was like, let's go see it. And I was like, dang, I'm like telling my brother, I'm telling anybody at this point, Transformers 1 is legit. The only thing I wish this movie did is when one of our heroes is so twisted and demented with anger at the unjustness of this world, that instead of turning into a plane and I'm going to fly and I'm going to be free, instead he transforms into a gun. Normally the #1 movie of the year is the movie that makes me the happiest, but there is precious little happiness in this movie. It's about an unorthodox friendship that forms between two high schoolers who both have a love for a particular TV show. There's no romantic tension between the two, not really. There's just the bond of both loving something that most people turn up their nose at. They encounter each other intermittently through their lives, but she has grown deeply obsessed with the show, to the point where she thinks it might be real. And now everything begins to have the heavy gravity of what we would now call a creepypasta. This was also the era where a TV show would go off the air, and unless you taped it on home video, you never got to see it again. I'm still waiting for Stunt Dogs to make its way to some kind of streaming service. Someone sitting on those rights. Through their time together, she implores him to run away with her, to escape her abusive stepfather. But to where? Well, that's the question, isn't it? But what could possibly be more worth escaping than the malaise and the ennui of the mid-90s? Again, this had to take place in like the mid-90s, before the proliferation of the internet, because if it happened at any point where that was happening, this would be on a message board or in a Discord. This should be a career-changing turn for Justice Smith. He's not exactly entirely convincing as like the younger high school version of himself, but he's hardly the worst like 28-year-old person to play a high schooler. But you quickly move past that because of the performances. There's even the moments where Justice Smith is asked to do that one thing that's the hardest of it all, talking directly to the camera. And he does it great. It works in this sort of movie. It doesn't come off necessarily as mannered. It's just like, well, why do narration? He's just here going to tell his story of his life right to us as he's still experiencing it. Not to leave out Bridget Lundy Payne, who has to carry more of sort of the unusual dialogue and the heavy gravity of it all, as if the show was the realest that ever happened. I remember when I loved media that much. As time marches on, and as fate pulls them apart, the future looks sadder and sadder. To the point where even the show that pulled them together in the first place, when viewed with newer eyes, looks like the witless, cheap, almost certainly Canadian crap that it always was. The future isn't good, but the past wasn't good either. You just didn't know any better. Soon it's the far future, where our protagonist has reached middle age, and he's been working a meaningless job for far, far too long. The people that surround him are all indulging in ceremony that just amplifies how much time has been wasted. And our hero finally loses. He screams with all he has, literally begging for mommy. He wails about all the time that has been wasted. Someone please save this wretch from his misery. And then he has to get back to work like nothing even happened. And he even sort of politely tries to apologize for people for his outburst, and no one even acknowledges that either. It's just easier to pretend it didn't happen and move on. Most people know I don't like horror movies that much. I didn't even like the horror-adjacent shows that were meant for kids, like the programs that they like in this movie. And PG-13 horror movies are just regular horror movies with the blood turned black. But I Saw the TV Glow is absolutely the most devastating movie of the year. And now, on to the worst list. On average, Driveway Dolls is bad for reasons you don't normally see in mainstream movies. It's about a lesbian couple taking a road trip where they accidentally carry contraband. The performances are fine, and the script is kind of meh, but this movie just thinks it's so darn cute with all of this editing trickery. It's not just that a car will drive by and then the scene will be replaced when it's briefly blocking the screen. That's pretty standard for some of these movies. No, like a whole scene will like fall down as if it's like the backdrop of a High School Musical, and then a new scene will be reassembled on top of it or something to start the new scene from there. It's so chintzy. If you're me, this is when you start looking up whoever the hell made this movie to see that they surely are some sort of film editor or possibly visual effects artist or something, to see all this sort of weird effects and things put into a mainstream picture like this. And it's true. They are, in fact, a film editor. And they are also the relation of another more famous filmmaker. No filmmaker gets a hit every time they go up to the plate. So maybe they sort of filmed this whole thing, realized it was a stinker, or at least not particularly interesting. So the editor went back into the green machine and tried to gussy it up a little bit. But now it just comes across like those sort of revamped episodes of the original run of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, where there's all these sort of visual effects and things that weren't there in the original. Saban are the king of reusing footage, after all, so that's not really surprising from them. But for a mainstream movie to be shot like this is very odd. Maybe if you don't edit video, it won't bother you as much as it bothered me. But for me, I can't even watch like reality programs because you just see how many times they have to cut around to try to construct a narrative out of things that weren't there. Similar things in movies that sort of went wrong in production. You kind of tell, well, they're really trying to cover for this, aren't they? The story also takes like a while to get going because if you don't know what this movie is referencing, then you're kind of like, what's the big deal? Like, why are we spending all this time? And then they keep cutting away to like other characters who are chasing them, so you don't really get that much time with our two still mostly charming protagonists. But the scenes with like the heavies who are following them are just not nearly as interesting or well written as they seem to think they are. And we get a couple of like flashbacks of very questionable necessity and taste at one point. And we get these weird flashbacks with Miley Cyrus and the psychedelia as one thing, as essentially the central character that set this whole thing in motion. But until they finally reveal what happened, like 70 minutes in, you were like, who is this? Hello, Miley, but who are you supposed to be? Again, if you know exactly who she's supposed to be, it starts to make a little bit of sense why they're pulling it in. But otherwise, this just makes this movie feel deeply stretched. Between that and the unorthodox and gimmicky editing, I feel that this was absolutely just some sort of salvage job, trying to make something releasable out of a project that evidently did not come together. And let's just be real here, I don't think they can do what they do with those things that they have. I mean, it's plaster, right? I think maybe it's lacquered or something, I'm not really sure. As it is, at the climax of our movie, our two heroines are going to go to Massachusetts because what they like is legal there. Except that happened in 2004, so I don't know if it was necessary to have this movie takes place before 9/11, because I don't think they ever get on a plane or anything like this. There's nothing changing with that. I'm not really certain why they didn't bother looking that one up. I happen to remember it because it was when I was in college, so I'm like, yeah, and it's like, hey, good, gay marriage, it's a good thing. Trans rights, by the way, and all those things, everything. So it's one of these things where it's like, how long would it have taken to look that up? This is a sort of careless thing I don't expect from this particular filmmaker with whom this director is associated with. In 2022, my 10th worst picture of that year was 3,000 Years of Longing. There were probably worse movies that year, there's probably worse movies this year, but I put it there for its stultifying vanity. This is a lot smaller of a story, but even as I look back on 3,000 Years, like, the story between the two of them was at least a little bit cute. I think what it is, they talk about if you try to look cool, you're not cool. If you try to look cute, you're definitely not cute. Because of this person's associations with another successful filmmaker, I suspect that they got to do whatever they wanted for this movie. And at a certain point where, yeah, cool, that's great, but also I don't think it came together in any way, and maybe somebody holding the wheel would have been good for this one. Remember the first rule of road trips: keep your eye on the road. And also, the driver gets to pick what the radio station is. I said a few years back that the creator of the American version of Ghost in the Shell would never make a single thing worth a damn for his entire career. And so far, nothing has made me question that at all. I'm as confident in that statement as I was when I said on Facebook that Elon Musk has all the same financial sense as that guy in Ocarina of Time who fills up your wallet with like hundreds of rupees when you sell him that bunny mask. And I wanted to say, yeah, and that also includes his offspring. That seemed a little unfair even for me. He does actually have like a 21-year-old daughter, and she seems to be doing fine. Even some of Elon's kids can see directly through his BS as it is. So, for once, I won't make fun of little children. They were threatening a Crow remake for the last, 30 years. We finally get it, and it's legitimately terrible. Now, I haven't seen the first Crow, so you may have to excuse me if I make a assumption that is improper. But if I'm not mistaken, the first Crow just starts right with the scene where the Crow is formed because it's immediately just, oh, something goes wrong, and then the rest of the movie is about the Crow themselves. In this remake, they have to establish who the Crow is and who the girlfriend is, and they have a relationship for literally a half an hour before they finally meet their grim end, and he gains his powers. They spend the time about their meeting, about his incarceration, about their escape, about their romance, which does sort of work, but it's so much spinning of the wheels. As an action star, the Crow is a little bit boring. He's just a guy who really can't be hurt by bullets and bludgeoning, so he just kind of stands there and takes a bunch of shots directly to his stomach and just kind of moves on and just hurts people. Yeah, John Wick, this ain't. There's a few momentarily diverting action pieces at some point, having an indestructible hero like this. But this movie wastes a lot of time where it shouldn't, including the new bad guy himself being supernatural, which I'm pretty sure wasn't part of the original. You have to forgive me. The original Crow is not streaming anywhere. I would have watched it. It's not streaming anywhere for free at the moment. This is what made discs on Netflix really cool. I could rent whatever I wanted. It's like, oh man, come back to me someday. You and Redbox. I don't know how many more times this guy has to roll snake eyes before we finally just send him back to the DMV Photography Center from which he scuttled. This guy sucks, and unlike the Safdie brothers, who eventually made something alike, I do not expect him to pull himself out of this spiral. Number 8. Oh my god, I can't do this. 2024 was the worst year for this list that I've had since I've been making these movies. I barely got to 10, as you saw earlier, but the top 10 list could almost be a top 10 list of movies that would have been the worst movie of the year in a different year. That's not true for Driveway Dolls or The Crow. Those wouldn't be the worst of any real year. They're just bad. But I've got this big list of movies that could be the worst of the year, and I'm like, how am I supposed to sort this? We have to have some sort of debate about which one really is worse than what.
Welcome to the Worst Film of 2024 debate. Every movie here today could be the worst movie of the year. Will the candidates please introduce themselves?
Argyle, where Matthew Vaughn and Tumblr conspiracies still can't save a movie. Borderlands, more like bored her ass off. Dune 2, more like Dune poo. Ooh! Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, more like Ghostbusters Frozen Assets. Remember that movie Frozen Assets? It's about a sperm bank and whatever. I haven't seen it. I just seen the review from 30 years ago. Harold and the Purple Crayon, another children's movie brought to life by killing it. Here, the latest from Robert Zemeckis, and almost certainly the worst movie he has ever made. If only I hadn't watched it. Joker, Foie Dieu, the worst sequel of the year. Lumina, an independent science fiction film that even the Sci-Fi Channel would not air. Megalopolis, Francis Ford Coppola's latest epic that should have been released on Epix. Not Another Church Movie, a parody of the Tyler Perry films released a couple years after Tyler Perry hung up the girdle for good. Sasquatch Sunset, a movie about a family of Yeti that I wish had stayed lost. The Sony Spider Villainverse.
Which one? There were like 3 this year. Alright. Now who's that on the end there?
Unfrosted. Jerry Seinfeld writes, directs, and stars in a movie about Pop-Tarts for unclear reasons.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, gentlemen. Through the course of these proceedings, we will figure out which one of these movies truly is the worst of the year. Let's hear what you all have to say. We'll begin in alphabetical order.
Well, I think that...
Okay, Argyle, that's enough. You can go home.
What? Why? Argyle is not nearly bad enough to make the list this year. Argyle is preposterous and dumb, and I like Matthew Vaughn's overly slick and glossy action less every single time I see it, but the rest of these movies are truly dysfunctional. Earlier in the year, in like May or whatever, the bottom of the top 10 list had a dalliance with the mostly unsuccessful but still not really that bad Fall Guy. But I think that movie was just released at the wrong time. It just wasn't enough of an action movie to be released in May. It probably should have been a later summer or maybe a September kind of thing, but you know, I think they just thought they had like a big action movie, but there's simply too much character stuff in it. It isn't really that much of an action movie. It is more romantic action kind of whatever. Maybe it's this generation's last action hero for also simply being far too inside baseball for anybody but big movie fans to like. Bother to it. Argyle doesn't sniff the worst list this year, and I still completely hated it. Oh, thank God, I can stop doing these effects. Ugh.
Alright, let's start with the biggest question. As to every candidate, do you believe that you are the worst movie of the year?
Some people have said that, yeah. Yeah. I think so. Not the worst the entire year, but maybe there's a chance I'm on there somewhere. That's sort of what I'm thinking. Maybe it's just residual resentment from Afterlife. Oh, you bet your ass I am. This is a very deeply incompetent science fiction film. You tend to put them pretty high on the list. Yes, but you also hate expensive folly. And what is all of Megalopolis except enormous folly? I doubt I'll get number one, mostly under the auspices that this movie just clearly wasn't finished. Some people said this was the worst comedy they saw in years. When I saw this, I legitimately thought it was going to be number one. Maybe one of them. You very nearly put Venom on the worst list that one year, and Venom 2 actually did make the big time.
I didn't hear anything from you, Harold.
I really don't think I'm the worst of the entire year.
Anyone present object to putting Harold at the number 8 spot?
Whatever, I guess. Sure. I guess, yeah.
Alright then, let's put him up on the board.
Harold and the Purple Crayon almost didn't make the list. It's sort of the same vein as like 9 Lives or La La Crocodile, as far as movies that just have a super outdated feeling of what people want in their kids' movies these days. But it's also a movie filled with utterly baffling decisions, like turning Harold into an adult for whatever reason. So he's just a sort of weird man-child walking around, talking to kids and using a crayon, and I'm like, okay. Even if we had to do an adult Harold for whatever reason, I think having the childlike Harold be played by Zachary Levi seems like he's trying to double dip on his success with Shazam. So, funnily enough, the movie is actually set in my home state of Rhode Island. They have like Rhode Island license plates and a couple of other things, but every single shot does not look a thing like Rhode Island. I'm almost certain it's just Atlanta, but, you know, with the appropriate license plates. At one point, there's like a bus canopy that says a city in Rhode Island that none of y'all would know unless you're from here. And I'm like, okay, that sometimes is enough to just be, all right, let's go easy on this. But then the rest of the movie happens. Anyway, this movie is padded and weirdly maudlin at times and extremely awkward. You give this childlike entity literally infinite power in this world, and all he does is get himself into sitcom situations that nobody could possibly ever laugh at. It's up there with a Playmobil movie as far as how intensely creepy and cynical and wrong-headed that this entire enterprise is. There's one moment in the last part of the movie that almost saved it from the work list because I thought was sort of interesting. Maybe it's something that kids do with crayons that they shouldn't do, but nevertheless, the rest of this movie is legitimately trying to get through, even once. Like, this movie's making me think back on La La Crocodile and be like, hey, at least that had a couple of decent songs in it. Like, holy moly. It's really not telling the story of the book of just a young man who explores his creativity. It's just a book that's been just Frankensteined into this 90 minutes of CGI-saturated kids crap. I know I said in 2022 that I don't put movies on the list because of the opinions or politics of the participants. But if I did it this year, this might be number one. Because between a certain star in this movie, you know, having his, like, anti-vax tweets and talking smack about the strike of all things, like, come on, like, you don't get kicked out of SAG? And then also finally throwing his red hat in the ring, evidently, after this whole thing. I legitimately never want to see this guy again as long as I live. He legitimately talked for years and years about how his faith in the Nazarene was central to his personality, and then the first chance he gets to finally talk about this, he puts his chips behind all this hateful garbage. It's all a front, isn't it? It's all fake. Just like everything Harold ever made. Look at that, number 8. I'm so proud of us. I'm going to put this on the fridge.
Goodbye, Harold. I hope you choke. All right, who's next?
Look, I don't think it's fair that he gets to represent 3 movies. All right, I had 6 good games, and we make 1 bad movie, and suddenly my brand is in the toilet. Like, surely we've got to be able to determine which one of those 3 is actually the worst of those 3. Otherwise, how are we even going to make a list at all? What? It's tricky. Don't make me choose. Is it, though? We're not doing a 3-way tie-in in this spot in this list, are we? That's just nonsense. And what's the deal with Pop-Tarts? This is nuts. Ah! Did you watch the Pop-Tart Bowl where they had the trophy was actually a functioning toaster and the people on the sideline dressed up as Pop-Tarts? Wait, really? That is 100% true. And I thought my jokes were bad.
Oh, they make a good point. Before we can determine which of the Spider-Sony villain-verse gets on the worst list, we must first determine which of those 3 movies is the worst. What do you say?
Not Craven, alright? Craven is just boring. It's just regular boring.
Well, that narrows it down swiftly. Which is worse, Venom 3 or Madam Web?
So let's talk about how these 3 movies do come off kind of similar. They're filled with lots of sort of weird cliches that you have to sort of put in there for, I guess, for franchise management. But they also have the equivalent of the giant mechanical spider from Wild Wild West.
Could you elaborate?
So they all just have stuff that the producers just clearly want to do something with. At one point in Venom 3, there's like a helicopter, and there's people hanging from from the helicopter on ropes. And I'm like, you guys seem like big targets. If the thing takes like a swing, gonna swing around into a tree or something. It's like, I don't think people actually do this unless they're gonna try to hit the ground. But just hanging from the thing so you can shoot in any direction, it's like, that's just really weird. I don't know if this is real or not, but I think some producers saw it somewhere or had the idea. It's like, we should do this. Or like the fight in Madam Web on the giant Pepsi sign, I think it was. You know, stuff like that. I don't know if Craven had a thing like that, because I've forgotten almost every ounce of Craven at this point.
Okay, so that's how they're similar, but now how would you say they are different?
So yeah, Venom 3 sucked, and it's filled with obnoxious needle drop moments and other stuff like this. Most of the performances in this movie are bad. Some of them are newcomers that don't really move the needle. Some of them people like Tom Hardy, who is trying his best, but at a certain point where it's like we've seen him do this thing where he looks like a dog turd rolled up in a paper towel now 3 times, so it's not really as interesting anymore as it was the first time. And then we have one performance from someone in here who I won't name, but their performance is legitimately worse than you might expect from honest-to-God hardcore pornography. When Glenn Danzig hires a bunch of like actual porn stars to be in his weird like movies, they usually do better than this person did here. It is the worst performance I saw in a mainstream movie possibly ever. Like, I do not know what went wrong. Like, Chiwetel Ejiofor, you know, he isn't really elevating the things, but he's doing his best. He's slumming away. He's trying to make it work, you know. He's not helping, but he is also, you know, trying.
Would you say the performances in Madam Web are better than in Venom 3?
Not by a lot. Maybe by virtue of Venom 3 being the final part of the series and putting a cap on everything, and the fact that Craven is the last of this kind of universe before they're going to try something new, I guess. Those movies are at least telling stories. Madam Web is about a precognitive character who is seeing the future of these 3 Spider-Women, but they're not origin stories for how they become the Spider-Women. It's just her trying to protect them from something that is trying to hurt them. They cast 3 different women as these Spider-Women for the future, but we don't see their origin story at all. We just see who they will be eventually, I guess after possibly 3 more movies. It's such obvious marking time for future stuff where they've got it completely backwards from the other formulas, where like Marvel, at least at the time, used to make stuff that was like, hey, here's a good movie, here's how we can expand it with this new character, this new thing, and they did that for a little while. This is literally completely opposite. Let's do all this stuff to try to establish who these other 3 Spider-Women are, and then try to eventually back-solve it into this by using Madam Web's precognition about it. It's put the cart so far before the horse, there isn't even a horse.
I've heard enough. Madam Web gets the 7th spot on the list.
Craven and Venom 3 are at least able to be watched as bad movies. They tell a story. And Venom 3 at least has some other symbiote characters coming in who are certainly a lot more interesting than Carnage. Now, there's a lot of them from the comics nowadays, and some of them make little minor appearances, but we're simply too far in to have it make much of a difference other than just essentially being cannon fodder. And Craven is just too boring to fuss over. It makes a lot more sense for Venom to be an anti-hero than Craven does. Craven is basically just Elmer Fudd, except jacked, so... But Madam Web is legitimately a disaster, and is trying to sort of reverse engineer 3 of these Spider-Women without doing any of the legwork, and just so we can see 3 attractive women in skin-tight outfits. I'm sorry, guys. We have Comic-Con now. We don't necessarily need this from our movies anymore. Evidently, this is what the producers think we want to see in movies, just all crammed together with absolutely no care. So evidently, people have completely lost their touch. We need more than that. We want to be able to see how these women actually become heroes. But evidently, these producers just were not interested in trying to actually tell their origin stories. They're trying to stretch it out as far and far as possible. It's all sizzle and no steak. And there's honestly not that much sizzle. If this continues a pace like this, Avi Arad's name on a production credit on a movie will start to look like the skull and crossbones, telling you, don't consume this.
And it is for the reasons expressed previously here that Borderlands goes home without placing.
You cannot be serious. If we are going to credit Chiwetel Ejiofor on how hard he's working in this movie, how can we not give credit to Cate Blanchett for how valiantly she is swimming against the current in Borderlands? Yes, I never say this, yes, she's too old. Yes, she's miscast. Yes, all the motherly stuff that they have to put on her for this thing to make sort of a motherly figure to the girl, whatever her name is, to Tiny Tina, whatever it is awful. But Cate Blanchett is trying as hard as she can to make this nonsense work. It isn't failing because of her. It's outside sources. She is a consummate professional, and I never want to hear anyone say anything bad about her ever again. Borderlands sucks, but for the most part, the cast isn't the problem. Kevin Hart tones his performance way down, which is kind of weird. I actually think the movie might have been a little funnier if he'd gone for it, but then again, we've seen him do that so many times, maybe that would have gotten tedious. Even to me, making a single movie about Borderlands is a game that takes like 200 hours to get through. And I'm kind of like, what's the point of this? Like, it's going to cover like one mission? The whole point is about like grinding for the new loot and having exotic guns and stuff like this, so I just thought this was a terrible idea. And obviously with like, the template of the Fallout show, that's probably close to what they should have done as far as like, missions, a longer story, but I guess that just didn't sell or something. They want to make a single movie about it. And it's bad, don't get me wrong, but it is not making the list this year. Maybe it's because I don't give a crap about Borderlands at all, that this didn't bother me at all. I'm sure if the Death Stranding movie turns out bad, they'll see me here whining about it, but whatever. Later, haters.
Okay, we have 9 candidates left. Now, which of the movies here is the least bad?
God, I hope I get it. I hope I get it. But I'm not singing because of copyright. Ignore him. Ignore who? I mean, I bet if you ask Coppola, he would think this is the best film still here. But I bet he's not happy that it wound up on this list. I'm not so bad, am I? It's just a movie about a kid meeting some imaginary friends. What's wrong with that? Yeah, we've done that before. It's called Foster's Home, and it's a bad cartoon. No, it isn't. Blue is just a really bad character. He's just so nasty and selfish. I have no idea why the show is actually all completely about him. I'm at least an improvement on Afterlife, aren't I?
In some ways, yeah. It is an improvement over Afterlife, and in other ways, sort of not. There was a rant that we didn't include in the 2021 video because the guy forgot to shoot it. Could we cut that in here?
Look, if this was actually shot in 2021, I would not have revealed this aspect of the plot, but now I'm pretty sure we've all seen it. So at the end of Ghostbusters Afterlife, we have the return of a character who is no longer with us to participate in this revival. Murray does make an appearance in Afterlife, and he was evidently the holdout that stopped Ghostbusters 3 from happening, while this person was still with us and when they could have actually participated and contributed. Instead, the best we can do is use like the deepfake technology and CGI to bring someone back from the dead to have one last appearance in these things. To be fair, the way they go about this is executed pretty well and about as tastefully as this not that great idea could have been done. It was probably the best way to do this if they insisted on doing it this way. Maybe the better idea would be to not do it at all, but that evidently just wasn't an option. I legitimately think I like the Lady Ghostbusters from 2016 more than Afterlife. The idea that you can be dragged back into something even after you're gone and have your peace interrupted for something that you cannot consent to and you are forced to participate in. And that's when I realized that I do not want a life after this one. Not even a heaven. Once my time is up, I just want it all to be over. I want to be out of everyone's reach. Yeah, what he said. And this is not covering the other problems this movie has. Like how this movie now has more characters in it than War and Peace, but Mr. Stranger Things has just nothing to do. Or how the allegedly intelligent granddaughter girl, whose character I still like, I'll say that, falls for this incredibly dangerous and stupid gambit to move the plot along at a certain point. Or how the mom character is the worst mother in a movie since, I don't know, Precious? She might be the worst mom character in a movie since Hearts in Atlantis. Like in Afterlife, where they're doing the haircut right before school, whatever, he's trying to eat his food and the hair is falling in the food. It's like, what are you trying to do, lady? What the hell is going on here?
I'm sorry, but as many objections as we have to Frozen Empire, no matter how tedious and obligatory all this is, it won't be making the worst list. There are things that are good about it, and it is an improvement on the previous entry. Same with Jurassic World Dominion is technically an improvement on Fallen Empire, because how could it not be? They're not good movies, any, and I object to how we continue to stubbornly try to make Ghostbusters a franchise when it resisted at every turn. But this is not one of the worst movies of the year. Not this year.
You gonna fade me out? This is embarrassing, come on.
For the remaining candidates, I don't see any way around this. I don't think this one would have ever been number one, not because he didn't hate every second of it, but because something would have snaked it in to be worse in a different, more interesting way. Number 6 on the worst list will be Sasquatch Sunset.
I sort of hate to kick this movie for trying something that's clearly very unique. We follow a family of 4 Sasquatches as they travel through an entire year as they encounter their own dangerous habitat and the encroaching human world. It's meant to be an absurdist comedy that evidently everyone who worked in it had an absolute ball making, and I believe it. So evidently one of the experiments that Andy Warhol once did was a movie called Empire, which was just a shot of the Empire State Building for 8 solid hours. And it's one of the things where like, okay, I get what this is about, but also you don't necessarily have to sit through all 8 hours to get the joke, as it is. I'm also glad we made a movie that really has no dialogue in it. You know, I was the one who wanted Alien vs. Predator to have no humanoid dialogue in it and just have them roaring and skittering at each other. Like, I thought that would have been cool, but... So I'm glad someone tried doing this, and I'm glad they all had fun and let out their inner animals, you know? Great. All good. None of this changes the fact that Suburban Sasquatch is legitimately trying to sit through, even once, and it's only 88 minutes long. If I may read from my notes here directly, if I may. The synopsis says, embark on an absurdist, epic, hilarious, and ultimately poignant journey. The only one of those things that's true is absurdist, because really, how could it not be? There must surely be a way to make a funny movie about these Sasquatches encountering all these inexplicable devices that the humans have made and cut out of their natural world. But it's also a movie about Sasquatch sex and boners and bodily fluids and bodily functions and a little bit of gore. I'm not as squeamish as I used to be, but I was still sort of surprised by that one. But I'm sorry to report that absolutely none of this is funny. It's vulgarity purposely made without purpose. The filmmakers are evidently deeply connected with their teenage selves because I don't know what other sort of audience is meant to just find this sort of utterly disconnected vulgarity just to be funny by itself, even with the absurdity of the costumes. Now, the Brothers Grimsby was actually more strategic as far as the vulgarity, as far as, like, I got the certain things, as far as, like, well, we're doing this, we're doing that. Like, I didn't like it, but I at least understood it. There was probably a way to tell the story in a way without dialogue, but it has evidently eluded these filmmakers. If I wish to be deeply cynical, I might suggest that these filmmakers might have known that they were not making something earnestly poignant. But you have to say that it's poignant in order to stay fresh in this whole independent scene of movie makers. We come up with this weird idea, you just do it, and you say it's poignant because apparently in 2024 and onward, every emperor everywhere just does not have any clothes on, but there's at least a quarter of the population who will just go up and say, oh, look how good your clothes are, and look at this, and just can't stop talking about the colors and the satins and everything else. I'm glad everyone had fun making this movie. I did not have fun watching it. Now make like a Sasquatch and get lost. Finally, I get to go back out into the wilderness. See, it's like that footage. It'd be better if you could see more of me. I better be funnier. It's supposed to look like a Sasquatch walking, but it just looks like I'm in Grand Theft Auto. See, this is the problem with independent filmmaking these days. They don't got big ideas like me.
It's funny you should say that, Lumina, because you make an excellent case for you being number 5.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, but between this and Sasquatch Sunset leaving right now, I think you just don't like independent cinema.
Of course we like independent filmmaking. Don't be silly. And say what you will about Sasquatch Sunset, at least the filmmakers worked properly within their technical limitations.
A long, long time ago, I was at a 48-hour film festival thing. I didn't participate, but I had a coworker that put their thing in, and I was watching the whole thing. And evidently they had some trailers at the start, and watched those. And one of them was by someone who had contributed, and it was a full-length movie, but it's literally got bed sheets up on the wall and these things. It's trying to be something else, and it's this act of such staggering incompetence that they clearly didn't see how bad what they had made actually looked. And that's the spirit that Lumina is bringing back to the big screen. Woohoo! Lumina has a little more money than that behind it, but most sort of low budget things from outsiders might have a good script, or they might at least pay for good effects or something. Lumina has the benefit of none of that. 4 friends go on an expedition to try to find their friend who was abducted by bad compositing effects, but she's being held in a deep underground military base, which stands for dumb. And if this wasn't a pure auteur project, someone might have said, hey, don't use the word dumb in your movie because you'll see it in every review you read, but whatever, I'm not telling you what to do. They visit Eric Roberts, who really must hate his wife or something, or love being out of the house. Putting Eric Roberts in this movie in a cameo is sort of like using AI, where you think it makes your movie look cool and professional, but it doesn't, because anyone can do it. It's not impressive. Anybody can just whip up something like this. Anybody can pay Eric Roberts to be in your movie for 45 seconds. This year there was another movie called Slingshot, which is a movie that was just sort of regular bad, but it's an action sci-fi kind of thing set in a space station, and it's not as good. Obviously it has a larger budget than this did, but also worked well with what it was doing as far as, at least it sold itself. It wasn't constantly making me think, well, this is just somebody holding a camera doing something dumb. That was regular bad, as I like to say. Then there was Skyline, which I thought at the time was an obscenity for taking a $500,000 movie that was just shot in someone's apartment and then putting $10 million of effects into the movie. But at least the effects were usually pretty good. I don't think the movie works, but at least they had one leg to stand on. People like to talk about auteur projects, by the things of Wiseau and Neil Breen. I haven't seen anything from them, but they certainly seem to have at least a little something going for them and have that energy about the creation. I don't necessarily get that from Lumina at all. At the end of this movie, there's a little text thing that pops up the way some movies have, hey, donate to your local wildlife conserve or whatever. And this one talks about the evident scourge that's happening through the world of people being abducted by aliens. And that's when you start to think, oh, the filmmaker is actually insane. Should I take this off the list? Is that fair? Maybe I should go easy on this because this guy just legitimately might be nuts. But this is just a piteous and horrid science fiction action thriller that climbed its way somehow into a movie theater twice. Let me look for my notes again, if I may. The first release was in July. I think it was July 20th or something. And I remember I was visiting my theater and I saw the trailer pop up on the little TVs they have, these things, and said coming out September 30th. And I was like, but it was already out, wasn't it? It came out, it flopped, it was re-released, and it flopped a second time. If they hadn't gone for 2 bites of the apple, I might have just let this one go. But these guys clearly want this to be some kind of huge hit, and they just have no idea what they have on their hands. If I may again, evidently someone is suing about this whole thing. Someone has apparently told the filmmakers that this thing could make $20 million on its opening weekend. I'm like, dude, you're out of your mind. Joker didn't make $20 million opening weekend. Not quite, but, So yeah, somebody sold that filmmaker a bill of goods, I guess. That sucks. This is the first one on the list that could actually beat other movies on the list. In 2020, SAG-AFTRA instructed its members to avoid working on the film Lumina, which allegedly failed to comply with required COVID-19 standards as per the union's Global Rule 1, making it one of the few movies to proceed without union support. Why get Eric Roberts in the movie? We can just get Zachary Levi with that attitude. That bastard sellout MAGA scab douche whistle. Don't forget that your God does not exist, but COVID does, you schmuck.
All right, we get it. Let's move on.
Oh no, I'm being abducted by aliens. This is a real thing that happens in real life.
All right, then, 7 candidates left. 4 spots on the list. Not enough seats in this musical chairs thing. Gonna have to start sending some people home.
Are you really gonna go out and say that any of us are worse than Lumina? That movie barely even functions. How could that not be the worst one of the year?
I envision something like a reverse parabola, where when you're a tiny filmmaker and you waste, $1 million on something that's total junk, that stinks. But as prices go up and as technical prowess must rise as professionals get involved, when you spend more and more money, it does get worse. But I think right now we are here at the very center of the parabola. It's what makes something like The Snowman so unusual. It was a movie that was clearly just never finished, someone just completely ran out of money, and it could not be saved by even a very talented editor.
What place was that on the list again? I think the effects on my shirt are broken. Shush, let him answer. You ever poured milk on these things? They should call them Snap Crackle Pop Tarts. Let me open it directly next to my microphone.
According to Tesco's special internet here, The Snowman was the 4th worst of 2017. So yeah, it seems like a perfectly fine place to put another movie that was clearly salvaged into a barely releasable state. Number 4 on the worst list will be Not Another Church Movie.
Years after Tyler Perry hung it up, and years after the movies were anything to talk about, we get this. A movie making fun of sort of the melodramas that Tyler Perry would produce, but with not that much more to say than, wow, isn't this silly? So evidently this filmmaker has been sort of haunting Jamie Foxx for a little while. There's a production credit with them in like 2000, I think, on the Jamie Foxx show. That might have been where they came together, and maybe he just finally cashed in his chip on this favor to have Jamie Foxx appear in the movie for like not that much. But then there evidently was an enormous course change, because a lot of the clips of Jamie Foxx have to have just his eyes without his mouth showing and be redubbed, I think, by someone else. So there was obviously some like enormous technical problems here. So maybe Jamie Foxx's small involvement, and then also Mickey Rourke's utterly workmanlike and very badly green screened cameo coming in here. It looks like they caught him like stepping out of the appearance on the Tonight Show or something. Hey, just do this real quick. It's literally like that, like he's doing a cameo for his birthday at like Wembley or something. Anyway, the appearance of these two legit stars might have pushed this into production, but they got it backwards in the sense of like he really needed to have a good sense of what he was going to say before then. But I think he started there and worked backwards. And then when things had to change, there's no getting back to him and fixing and having everything sort of fit together neatly. There's lots of random tangents, random pop shots at Tyler Perry. They say that a parody has to come from a place of love rather than a place of hate, but I think it can come from a place of hate. But this one seems to come from a place with not knowing what you're even talking about. I really haven't watched any of Tyler Perry's movies. I've seen clips of on TV, and it's not really my speed when he's getting like heavily melodramatic. That's not really for me. This movie seems to be deeply resentful about Tyler Perry's meteoric success, but doesn't have anything to really say about why any of that is problematic. We got some like random 50 Shades jokes, some other stuff. This really seems to be just very deeply disorganized. But I was perfectly willing to chalk this one up and say, okay, I don't necessarily get African-American humor all the time. I don't necessarily get Tyler Perry's appeal, so I might not necessarily be picking up all the stuff they're dropping down in this movie. Okay, sure, despite all of its amateurish values and things, I'm like, okay, like maybe I'm just not getting it. But then the movie made a joke about its Medea stand-in at one point that is so far out of line and easily kicks this thing into an R rating that I just was utterly appalled. And I'm no prude of these things, but in the modern era, maybe in the 90s, this sort of joke would be okay, but nowadays I'm just like, this is the most tasteless joke of the entire year, and it was no reason for this. Not Another Church Movie has got to be worse than almost everything Tyler Perry's ever made, and any of the movies, almost any of them that came out. It's definitely worse than both Meet the Blacks 1 and 2, I'll say that, as far as just being utterly appalling. It's good to have Jamie Foxx back, but not here. His one scene is obviously the best thing in the movie, but everything he's saying is clearly improvised, and he's just sort of having fun and riffing, and he's sort of naturally funny in a way that will elude this filmmaker, I suspect, forever. I'm legitimately looking forward to that Jamie Foxx Cameron Diaz movie they're doing for Netflix at sometime in January. I'm paying for Netflix, I might as well watch it, right? Exit stage left.
You seem a bit miffed, Unfrosted. What's on your mind?
What exactly is wrong with Netflix? Got a pen and paper? Oh, that's hilarious. What's wrong? Can't take a joke?
All right, then plead your case. What's so bad about Unfrosted?
Did you mean, what's the deal with Unfrosted?
I did not mean that.
Okay, so in the same way that the Weird Al movie was a pastiche on music movies, I think that Unfrosted is a pastiche of the corporate product movie that we've had. Not that a movie's a corporate product, but about a corporate product. Like Air, and Blackberry, and the Tetris movie, and Flamin' Hot, and all the sort of things we've been getting sort of thick and fast lately. That's kind of trendy right now. The Pop-Tarts you have are, in fact, frosted. I can see it. Yeah, what am I, a communist? This is evidently a deeply personal project for Seinfeld. He's evidently been trying to make this sort of movie for years, and his love of cereal is well documented. But perhaps it's also a deeply mercenary one. When Netflix said, hey, here's this much money, make a movie. I don't know if they put any restrictions other than the budget on it. This also might be the most celebrity-saturated movie since Coneheads, where even like John Hamm and John Slattery both come back, I guess, as their Mad Men counterparts. It's like, okay, what's that about? I don't know if you have the rights to that, but okay. Hugh Grant appears as Thurl Ravenscroft, who is the voice of Tony the Tiger, and Bill Burr plays JFK, in which is probably one of the better scenes in the movie. We got Melissa McCarthy, we have Jim Gaffigan, we have Amy Schumer. Movie's quite loaded up, is what I'm saying. So there's about 900 gags in this movie, and maybe like 6 or 7 of them worked for me. Maybe it's just wearing me down at a certain point, but I really feel like this should have had a higher success rate than it did. Aha! But are any of the jokes in that movie as wretched as that one terrible joke in Not Another Church Movie? They do invoke January 6th at one point. Specifically, January 6th was just like a riot or something. One of the characters is dressed up like the QAnon shaman. It is explicitly a reference to January 6th. Ooh, that's bad. But no, nothing's quite as bad as the joke from Not Another Church Movie.
You make a good point. Unfrosted is a really dreadful comedy made by someone who threw a lot of cereal at the wall and very little stuck because it's cereal and not pasta. But there's a movie from the streaming world in the same marketing biopic vein that is worse than this movie in every single way. And that means Unfrosted is going home. Number 3 on the worst list is the Apple original film Fly Me to the Moon.
Fly Me to the Moon starts with a slightly dubious premise, giving credence to the disproven theory that the moon landing was actually faked on a soundstage. But the angle is a little interesting in the sense that they want to have a contingency plan if the actual mission fails, rather than simply trying to trick everybody. First hour of this movie establishes Johansson as the marketing guru who's trying to sell the moon landing to the public, which means we have half of this movie, literally half of it, where the entire premise of the fake moon landing is not even involved. When Johansson and Tatum first meet up, they're at a diner, and Tatum says, "You're on fire," and she acts like it's a pickup line. She's like, "No, you're really on fire," because her book landed on fire, because she leaned it over a little tea light or something, because apparently this diner has mood lighting or something. It's just the first line in a huge list of demonstrations that this character is just a dimwit. And so are the writers for thinking that anybody could possibly be holding a book while it's on fire and have nobody notice. Nobody's that unaware, except maybe the writers. At one point she goes, "Let me handle it." And then she handles it off screen where nobody can see exactly how she did it. And then someone else goes and says, "She's good." They just won't earn anything here. They don't actually want to explain how she's selling anything like they do in the marketing stuff in like Air. She just flim-flams people because she's just a con artist. Fly Me to the Moon is a romantic comedy without a drop of romance or comedy in it. Tatum is a complete blank slate, and Scarlett Johansson has never been less charismatic in her entire career. How could the lead of a romantic comedy be someone who nobody could possibly fall for because she's so transparently dishonest? This movie doesn't earn its pathos or anything else it attempts to do when it really tries to act like it's about something. It is just pure cinematic waste. Unfortunately, it's still bad, but I laughed a couple of times. Maybe it just wore me down with the pure audacity of just how damn ridiculous this movie is. Besides, Unfrosted was nominated for an Emmy? So, like, is it a TV movie or is it a movie? Like, what are we doing here? Both of these are such oddball projects that they only exist in their current form in the era of streaming entertainment. Even like 5 years ago, someone would have taken either one of these scripts and they would have bashed them down to be a little more regular. When you think about it, Fly Me to the Moon making its way to Apple as opposed to any other normal studio kind of just says the story right there. It says that all the studios looked at the script and said, "No, we're not going to do this. This needs to be changed to this." And Apple's like, "Yeah, sure, go for it." This badly needed some rewrites to just sort of bring everything together, make it cohesive, and also, like, the execution wasn't really that good anyway, so maybe they thought the general gravitas about Apollo 11 would pull this all together, but since, even though this is allegedly an alternate history, it's not alternate enough we actually don't wonder if they're actually going to make it or not, or anything's changed, because it's just too similar. So there's no actual drama about any of the stuff that's actually happening. Like, are they going to make it to the moon? It's like, probably, or else things are going to be really different. I have a lot of different books to change. But in the era of content, Apple just didn't give a crap that this was just basically 2 scripts that were barely glued together with spit. They said, let's do this, let's throw this to the thing to have something to have on our 7th place streaming service. Any film producer worth his cigar would balk at the idea of a high-concept, very expensive, romantic comedy actually coming out to a real theater the way they did with this one. And they got what anyone could have expected. It bombed, and it sucks. This is where the parabola starts to move back upwards, where we start to get like, really expensive nonsense like this. Yeah, not another church movie is like less successful, but with all the professional people working on this one, how couldn't it be, I legitimately think that Belgian cartoon they made in 2008, Fly Me to the Moon, might be better than this. It's been a long time since I've seen it. All right, I'm off to find me a toaster. We might be unfrosted, but definitely not untoasted.
All right, 5 movies remain. 2 spots remain on the list. And all the movies that are left are quite big budget productions.
I'm sorry, but what is If still doing here?
If sucks, evidently.
To this level, though? Like, second or worst film of the entire year? Really?
It's on the list.
What about Dune 2? He's supposed to be actually good. I pressed B! You know what? Forget I said anything. Oh, I couldn't find a toaster. So I'm gonna eat them like this. Oh, you say without toasting them? Will you shut up? Wait, where's my mouthful?
Well, all right, you 3. Megalopolis, Joker, here. You all have something in common. You are all clearly the result of extraordinary ego.
Megalopolis is Francis Ford Coppola attempting to make a modern epic, and he comes back with fistfuls of nothing. He seems absolutely assured of the significance of this nonsense, this parable about ancient Rome, with a little bit of objectivism sprinkled in there for whatever reason. Sensibly, he has nothing nice to say about the modern conservative movements, but people have compared Megalopolis to Neil Breen's output, and that's never a good thing. Now here, on the other hand, is another gimmicky project from Zemeckis. The entire movie takes place from one particular camera shot for the history of this house, and even before the house was even there. It's basically one of my videos because my camera's over there and nobody helps me make these things, so. Anyway, here has a lot of tiny little vignettes, mostly in order, but sometimes not, of a family living through this house, and then sometimes things that happen beforehand, or other people living in the house briefly, and other things just completely scrambled up. Lucky for this movie, the wedding takes place inside the living room within shot of the camera, and how could this not just lay bare the entire artifice of this movie? The wedding didn't take place in the living room because it rained. It rained because you have to have the wedding in the living room because otherwise you won't be able to see it because of the pointless gimmick that this movie continues to cling to. We could have just not seen the wedding. We didn't see the honeymoon, certainly. The movie continues to jump around and give us tiny scraps of these characters that we barely understand, and even our main characters, we just get tiny little strips throughout the entire thing thrown into a blender. It is like trying to read a book this way, on the edge. This movie contorts itself to support a gimmick that makes it both a dramatic and visual flatline. Here is absolutely worse than Megalopolis by a mile. I might get something more out of Megalopolis if I could dare myself to watch it again. But here is absolutely agonizing to get through, and it's the closest I've come to walking out of a movie in 10 or 11 years. You make a great point. Megalopolis will be the second worst of the year, and here will be the first. Thank you all for watching. You've been a lovely audience, and goodbye. Mwah!
Not so fast, fiend. Hey, not you. You.
Huh?
We are not done with you yet.
Loads of commentary about Joker 2 has talked about how it is not an expansion on the previous entry, more of an epilogue to the original than its own movie. That's really bad news for a sequel. This movie absolutely never stops talking about the events in the first movie. Half of the movie is about the Joker on trial. It's not really stacked up in a way we think it's about him possibly still somehow getting away with it. And let's just be way too real here. If this movie released 2 months later, maybe the notion of someone going on trial despite intense evidence towards this person's guilt, it might not be so odd to think that there might just be 12 people in this world that legitimately might not convict a guy who was caught on camera killing someone. Okay, but that's just what happens. The other half of the movie is set in his jail, where it's lots of jailhouse cliches, lots and lots of smoking cigarettes as slowly as possible, and then the tepid romance that exists between him and Lady Gaga. Say what you will about the original Joker, but at least when they deconstructed the Joker, they built the new one back out of stuff that was an actual observation about certain people in our world. The new Harley Quinn is deprived of her psychological expertise, that very thing that she thinks she can use to help the Joker, but then keeps allowing him to continue to drag her down into insanity, and then it replaces it with nothing, really. I mean, she can sing, but there's not much else to her now. To be fair, apparently this won't be the worst Harley Quinn release thing that's going to happen within this period of time. What the hell is up with this? Then there are the songs. I counted 13 musical numbers in this movie. I think Cruella had like 20 needle drop moments, but that one used them halfway decent most of the time. And sometimes it is just our boy Joaquin Phoenix singing in the real world, and sometimes it like moves into these elaborate set pieces. There's a couple that sort of are diverting, but let's just be real, like Joaquin Phoenix isn't singing them up to the level that they should be done. I swear that even the music in Wonka is better executed than it is here. And you all know what I mean when I say by that. Poor Lady Gaga, she can sing her actual ass off. But in this movie, she isn't expanded in anything more than that. She's just one more woman for the Joker to latch on to and become interested in, and eventually, spoilers from here on out, and eventually scorns him. There's one scene in this movie that is legitimately terrific. It's when Gary Puddles, the shorter fella who was in the first movie, comes back in and testifies about to the Joker's face, and he's very upset, and he talks about the trauma that was inflicted on him and how he felt betrayed, and he said how he was the only guy who never made fun of him. This is the only time when retreading the first movie actually expands both movies. This movie needed a lot more stuff like this. But that's really the only time that happens. Joker 2 is so strangled by the events of the first movie that anything it would try to do to expand it just gets dragged down with it. And then we come to our ending. Now, I'm not going to say exactly what goes down with it, but it's a scene where they made a mistake earlier on in a scene that can happen in a bunch of other movies. Please put your hands together. Welcome to the Inanimate Players!
Children of Earth, I'm here to tell you that there may be a traitor among us. See, if we ended it right here, it would be too obvious. So I'm going to wait for me to say something totally different. I certainly love buttered pecans. There, wait, you call away. Why do you look at that guy? You're supposed to look at me, I'm the star.
What?
Who are you?
It's me too, guy. We've worked together for 14 years.
Has your face always looked like that?
I wish you would throw me away.
You're the one with candy in your neck, right?
I was literally designed for this, and I can still barely put up with your
So yeah, the unwarranted close-up was suddenly like, why are we looking at this guy for a second? It's like, oh, this will be important later. But for right now, it's just a guy. And you're like, is this the casting director's brother or something? What are we doing here? They literally did this in The Dark Knight. There's a one sort of hold on a character for a little too long. And, you know, it makes me wonder if the people who made this movie even ever saw The Dark Knight. I'm not really sure if they'd ever heard of it or anything. Remember when Batman stuff could not only be great, but literally legendary? Some people say that all this is intentional. The long and toneless music numbers are meant purposefully to frustrate us. The Joker is completely disempowered and brought down to his own level of his own normal, pitiful self in order to mock the people who took the wrong lesson from the original movie. Look, I'm famously not that big of a fan of Fight Club. I haven't seen the whole thing. I've seen most of the ending. I know what it's about, you know. I haven't seen the whole thing because when I see the ending of a movie, I just can't bring myself to go bother with it until I forget. But obviously with a movie like that, with its ending, it's very hard to sort of get away from that. If David Fincher made Fight Club 2, Fighter Clubber, and he went out and said, no, explicitly, this is not about how having a fight club is supposed to be a really cool thing. It's about how wimps who work bad jobs and are unsatisfied with their masculinity will invent power fantasies for themselves and then get swept up into fascist movements. Like, that's already in the first movie. You don't need to take a second movie to go out and say, no, you were wrong. I'm going to scold you. The point of a sequel is not to correct the misconceptions of the original. The point is to expand things, and by lashing out and doing it this way, you just lessen the impact of both movies. Some people say there'll be a re-reckoning of Joker Folie somewhere down the line. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the movie will get re-examined and have some of the ideas that kind of got lost in this tantrum. People have re-examined like Freddy Got Fingered, and are finally seeing it the way that Tom Green probably always meant it to be, as a pillar of anti-comedy and a giant joke at the expense of the studio. But I am not kidding when I say that Joker Folie might be the worst sequel to ever make it to a movie theater. Now, I'm not talking about like Highlander the Source, or like Happily Never After 2, or The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2, stuff that didn't haunt a movie theater. I'm saying a real movie that got to a theater. I think it could be the worst sequel ever made. I got my list here. Godfather 3, Caddyshack 2, Highlander 2, Blues Brothers 2000, Son of the Mask, Deuce Bigalow, European Gigolo, The Rise of Skywalker. I legit think that there's at least a conversation to be had that Joker 4 2 is worse than all of them. I remember a tweet, I don't know if I was able to find the tweet, but I was tweeting at the Cinema Snob, and he said that Blues Brothers 2000 was worse than Caddyshack 2. I think Caddyshack 2 is friggin' horrendous. But I went and said, don't say things you can't take back. And he responded, I'm not taking it back. Gun to my head, I would rather watch Caddyshack 2 than Blues Brothers 2000. So that one's apparently terrible. And now, a true story. When I was in my acting class in college at one point, I think I was TAing this one, and there was a young man who came in. One day he had clown makeup on his face. And didn't really explain it. We're just like, okay, he's just doing it. Sometimes he just want to be a clown, whatever. And I saw him a couple days later before the next class had started. So it might have been like the next day. So I'm around, I was like, hey, buddy, we're not a clown today. And he said, oh, yeah, that was a catastrophe. With Joker 2 being number 2 on the worst list, there is simply no room for Here or for Megalopolis on this list. All these movies represent the worst in self-indulgent folly, especially Here, which is almost unwatchable. But Zemeckis and Coppola have earned the right to experiment like this, if they choose. Nothing in Todd Phillips' filmography, including the original Joker, gives him the right to do this. Even if you love the original Joker, I think this movie spoils everything. The joke has just finally gone too far. Hey! Whoa, whoa! You know goddamn well that you would rather watch Sasquatch Sunset again than watch Here. Here is earnestly unwatchable and the height of vanity and gimmickry. Are you really going to hold some new filmmakers to a higher standard than Zemeckis for making this earnest trash? Get the out. Looks like it's time to mosey. Come on, Here, let's do it vaudeville style. All right. Now it's my time to shine. Worst movie of the year, Dune 2, Dune Harder.
Oh, wow, you made that easy on me. All right, let's hear it. Why is Dune 2 the worst movie of the year?
I never saw Dune 2.
Excuse me?
Yeah, when Warner Brothers shut down Rooster Teeth, I was just like, screw it. Screw you. I'm not going to see Dune 2. You know? And furthermore, I didn't even like Dune 1 that much. I resent how much we got this sort of movie that was completely cut in half. Like Wicked, Hunger Games, Breaking Dawn. All these movies that were cut in half were not remotely as badly done as this one was. It's just like, let's go for a little while and stop. I don't even like Ruby that much. It's just getting really hard at any way to defend Warner Brothers at this point. I remember seeing Joker on the IMAX screen, and there's one other person there. Sure, it was a weekday, but it's also just like, wow. Like, the Warner Brothers is just now that giant pile of money in The Dark Knight where they slide down it and burn his half. Except they're burning both halves. Okay. I'm sorry I put Dune 2 on the worst list when I didn't see it. That's not fair. Okay, can I have my Game Boy back, please?
So now what?
Well, I'm the only one left. Am I the worst movie of the year?
Judges?
You think we can afford judges?
I don't know. There's like 10 of you representing a bunch of different versions of yourself. What is this, TikTok?
Everyone else left the stage. And by stage, I mean not really, and also there's only just me. And we're both the same person. Of course If's not the worst kids movie of the year. What are you talking about? Yeah, like, If sucks, don't get me wrong. And, you know, it has this, like, sort of heavy gravity over everything, like it's the friggin' Wire. And apparently school doesn't exist as a girl, because it's have her adventures and whatever. So as far as, like, kids' movies, Harold is way worse. And as far as movies that were saturated with guest stars, I think probably Unfrosted is probably also worse. So what was this doing on the worst list? No way.
I don't know. There must have been some sort of error. All the names of the movies that were nominated were on these little pieces of paper. Hold on. Okay, so I had Tube Guy dig these out of the trash. These were the things that we used to make the worst list. Alright, so what's on here? On these Joker 2, makes sense. Here, not another church movie. Lumina. If.
The F is backwards.
What the? Wait a minute. This was totally here before. Here it is, the Garfield movie that does not resemble Garfield in essentially any way, shape, or form. It's not just that Chris Pratt is simply no good in Garfield in this way. It's not just that in order to stick with the kid formula, Garfield has to have a big grand adventure, which is something he very rarely does in the comics or in any other media. It's not that Garfield is not particularly lazy or even that he's ever sarcastic. The only thing he is fat, and we get to keep making fat jokes, so I guess that's cool to keep doing those. It's not just that we have to tell a story about Garfield reconnecting with his father, which is what they did in the friggin' Mario movie. And look, I'm glad to have found a couple people who also weren't big fans of the Mario movie, but this makes the Mario movie look like the Lego movie. We see Sam Jackson voicing his, much larger father, and he's taking a trash can lid and putting stuff on it. I'm like, are you making a Garfield movie or are you making a Heathcliff movie? Snoop Dogg voices someone because of course he does. At one point we have a musical needle drop moment with Let's Get It On playing, because of course we do. There's product placement for Walmart and FedEx and Olive Garden, because of course there is. We have a ton of time taken up with this subplot at a farm. We have like a bull character trying to find the love of his life, and it's just taking up absolute ages of time in this thing. Maybe this is a deep cut character I'm not familiar with, but I don't think so. But that was what the Garfield show did back in the day. They brought back Lyman after a 29-year absence. They had a 4-parter episode in the Garfield show talking about John's roommate who just vanished unceremoniously because he used to be the owner of Odie, and they explain it in this whole thing, and I'm like, man, that's how you do it, man. There's a cat translator now that some of the cat characters use in this movie so they can talk with humans. So apparently in like 50 years of comics they never had to do this, because the entire point of Garfield is the fact that everything says in a little talking balloon. He's not always heard by the humans. Occasionally he is. Just when it makes it funnier, they'll just break that rule, because whatever, it's science fiction. But anyway, the whole point is about attributing a personality to the way you see your cat behave without hearing them speak. That's everything that Garfield is. You guys might not believe this, but back when it came out in the late 70s, Garfield was extremely counterculture. They never put a cat translator in the comic, I think, in the last 46 years. But now they just had no other way to get around this. So like, okay, we're just going to add something in here. How can Garfield be aloof if they have translators so that the humans know exactly what he's saying and what he wants? This isn't Garfield. This is just a tiny orange thing that sucks. To paraphrase the late Roger Ebert, and to express the opinions of some other Garfield experts that I have weighed in on at this point. Now, I haven't seen the Garfield movies with Bill Murray at this point. They're also not on streaming. I would have watched them to compare. But the Garfield movies with Bill Murray were no masterpieces, but they were compared to this. Thank you all for watching. Everyone is talking about how I Saw the TV Glow as a trans allegory, about going down the wrong path for far too long and hating who you've become. I didn't necessarily see it that way. I thought that might have been supposition on other people's parts because the filmmaker herself is trans, but I think they've gone out and said that, yeah, this is what that's about. So I'm like, okay, I guess I just missed the boat. But again, I'm also the person who missed the boat on Nope. What was the metaphor in Nope again? Let me look here. The metaphor of an entity in the entertainment industry that hurts people and perpetuates trauma that is destroyed by photography. Like, that seems a little more obvious in retrospect. Maybe I'm wrong a second time. I don't know. Sometimes just this sort of like stuff is not always immediately obvious to me. Unlike everyone else, I don't do these videos to show the internet that I'm smart. I do this to sort of unpack my feelings about these things. Making a top 10 list is very fascinating to be like, well, why is this worse than this? And to have to eventually sort it out in ways that, when you eventually look at them, eventually just are absurd. Every critic misses the boat a couple of times, People didn't necessarily get what Tom Green was going for, but also in the sense that he filled his movie with such horrifying imagery that it was one of the things where they took it at face value. I don't see that sort of alternate interpretation with Joker, as far as, no, he deliberately made something bad and unwatchable by filling it with musical numbers and by taking someone that other people appreciated and just flattening it and making it really bad and dumb. No, I don't see that. He thought he was making something profound, and he didn't. The joke will always be on him. Also, I've been purposely mispronouncing folie à deux this entire time. Just see if anybody comments. You clearly didn't take French. I didn't take French. I took Portuguese. No one around here speaks French. They end it by playing that one song, I wish I knew what I knew now when I was younger, and I wish I knew what I knew when I was younger to not see this movie. Got him.
Alright, I linked this article earlier, but this is what we have here. I don't know who made this statement. This is just what came out with talking about the Harley Quinn comic. Warning, we aren't kidding. If you are grossed out by farts, then this comic isn't for you. And that's perfectly okay. Though I am judging you. You're gonna judge me for not appreciating flatulence. And I don't think it even means in a humorous way. I mean, this is clearly meant to be some sort of paraphilia, right? Because that's the big thing people like to do is say, oh, tee-hee, it's just a joke. Wouldn't it be funny if this thing that you are intensely into? This happens on Cameo sometimes. I remember both Tara Strong and Pat Contry of the Pat the NES Punk got cameos from people, and there were requests for like, hey, put your feet up in the camera, or hey, fart on camera, and it's like, you know, it's one of the things just like the people apparently who made these requests just can't uncouple that from their normal life or realize what a friggin' odd request that is. I'm certain, thankfully I don't run in this circle at this point, but, you know, the Red Circle and anti-woke crowd, people on the YouTubes have surely ripped this thing to pieces, and I'm not going to go out and say this is the one time where the clock was right this millennia, because the clock is never right, because it isn't a clock. It's not an actual mechanism or anything that represents a perspective on life. It is just entirely reactionary, and when someone that they don't like does something, they have to be against it, is the thing. It's entirely to try to farm clicks off of the deeply credulous on YouTube. But then also, like, as much as I have absolutely no respect for anybody on that side, the notion that I'm being judged by this person from the other side for not liking this. There's a certain point where I think almost everything that's wrong with everything right now would be great if people gain just a little bit of shame. Not that you should be ashamed. If this is what you want to do, you gotta do it. I don't necessarily think you need to wreck another comic character to do it, but if this is really what you want to do, I guess go for it. But, you know, there's plenty of people who are just totally, shamelessly unethical these days. And I guess this is considerably less troublesome. Oh, I don't know where else to go from here. But I guess in this, it's just like this is, I guess, sort of harmless. But also, still, I maintain my what the hell are we doing here? This is the host footage. I decided today, when I was going through this, that it was going to be hosted by Dr. Eyebaltron. Because why not? Mostly because that also means I can shoot it sitting down.
They should call them Smack-Tackle Pop-Tarts. Maybe I'll just use that take because it makes no sense. This should be a career-changing performance from Jaden Smith here. Not Jaden Smith, Justice Smith.
Alright, 9 candidates remain. What is the best... Oh boy, I almost dropped myself. Oops, who's doing the voice?
And what's the deal with Pop-Tarts? This is not... Ah! I hope that take was good, because if I'm not doing that again, because that really friggin' hurt. I legitimately think that Belgian cartoon they made in 2008, Fly Me to the Moon, might be better than this. It's been a long time since I've seen it. Let's see. It is. No, never mind, it's not. I didn't watch it. It's equally as good. What? How could you? Between this and Suburban Sasquatch. What? How could you? Between this and keep saying Suburban Sasquatch. I should be watching Red Letter Media as I'm on the TV right now, but I'm not really. I'm just having it on to see if it changes the light a little bit. Gotta take my fat ass pill. Exit stage left. I pointed both directions. What am I thinking? Excuse me? I'm sorry, but between this and Sasquatch Sunset leaving right now, I think you just don't like independent cinema. Cinema. This is not obscene. I'm throwing dice over there, and I'm so confident I don't even have to look. I got 7. Anyway, at the end of the movie, our heroines are going off to, My phone just did something. Hold on. Can't believe I heard that. It's out of... Oh, you! You, DoorDash! It's time for that Games for the Sweep of the Nation. Shut up, DoorDash. Oh, I heard my text message go off. Maybe it's my family. Maybe it's my friends. Maybe we're going to have something fun. And then you look, and there it is. Shut up, DoorDash. And you know me, I'm all class. Drinks beer, smashes it on my head. Drinks beer, smashes it on someone else's head. Picks nose with my entire hand. Picks nose with my foot. I have to drink my purple now. No.
Would it have killed you to brush your hair before you started filming? What are you, my mom?